This is Jordan Edwards, and this is the Business Jiu-Jitsu Podcast.
Good afternoon, Dave Crull.
Mr. Edwards, thank you for having me on, my man.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Welcome to the podcast. Very excited to have you on today.
I've been looking forward to it. It's been on the calendar for a good 6 weeks or so. So this has been a good start to January for me.
Yeah. Well, you reached out through the website, which I'm very grateful that you did.
And likewise, I'm grateful for your response. You've got the foothold here, not me. And so I appreciate your generosity with your time and for being a supporter. Great representation of the BJJ community. Not surprising at all that's the way we support one another. So thank you very much.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. And I think that you fit in perfectly here with all of your very impressive background. And it should be known that you have recently started your own podcast, the BJJ Executive Podcast. So we're brothers in arms on that.
That's right.
On that front, we're a couple of business guys that masquerade as jiu-jitsu rios.
That's it. Blind squirrels looking for nuts.
So let me introduce a little bit of who you are and what your background is. You have a very impressive background. So Dave is an operationally focused financial executive with 20 plus years of progressive leadership experience in both distressed and stable environments. Dave's responsibilities include evaluating acquisition opportunities, capital raising, global structuring, tax accounting, and managing administrative functions for his organizations. Prior to joining Aero Capital Solutions, Dave was the chief financial officer of Red Aviation, a portfolio company of the Cap Street Group, where he was recruited to lead the company through its ongoing financial and operational restructuring efforts. Dave joined the Red Aviation after 8 years at Aero Turbine, Inc., a wholly owned subsidiary of AerCap, which was a New York Stock Exchange company, where he held multiple financial and commercial leadership roles, including over 4 years at the company's CFO. Prior to that, Dave held senior financial positions with Spirit Airlines, also a New York Stock Exchange company, Highland Capital, and multiple operational roles within the maintenance and engineering organizations of both American and Delta Airlines. Dave received his BS from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and his MBA from the University of Dallas, and is a former U.S. Marine. Dave, sincerely, thank you for your service.
Thank you for your tax dollars.
He is a resident of Austin, Texas, with his wife and 2 sons. Dave is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt, like myself, which we're excited to dig into more. Like I said, Dave found a good spot on the Business Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. He found his home with a great background like that. He fits in. I should also note that Dave is a teammate of a friend of the Business Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, former Navy SEAL JP Dinnell. Right. And JP now lives in Texas and is an executive with Echelon Front and was on the podcast a couple weeks ago. So, Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Man, what a weird experience to hear that business bio read. You know, I don't actually think I've ever had it read out loud to me before. So, so how strange that is. You know, especially in the context of jiu-jitsu. But like you said, I mean, that's kind of the original common thread I suppose we would have had. And as I've come up through the business world, I mean, I've always tried to kind of hustle through jiu-jitsu as well. And that's what brought the BJJ Executive Podcast up was, you know, just trying to manage those inevitable opposing forces that come up in life. How do you build your career? How do you find time to stay on the mats? I struggled with it. And my hope is that by having conversations like these, people will find commonality, common ground, and realize that it's not that uncommon. And stick it out, throw some knees and elbows a little bit, you know, hang in there. Yeah. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
There's no straight line to success, and there's certainly no straight line in business or in jiu-jitsu. And the more voices that people hear out there, I was actually just thinking about this earlier. There's one of the owners of my academy, an amazing black belt here in New York. His name is Matt Cully. He also is the founder of a grappling organization here on Long Island called Rise.
Okay.
And there was 3 distinct times during my blue belt years where I had the blue belt blues. I fell off, and Matt called me and said, "Hey, come back. You don't have to go to class. Like, I'll train." You know, he just trained me. He's like, "Hey, let's just roll." And there's that fear of coming back to class and thinking like, I'm going to get beat up, I'm going to get killed. And of course, at the
I
time, you don't
know.
think that to yourself, but anybody who can be a voice like that is important, whether it's on a podcast or you just call somebody up, and making sure that all the people who practice any part of life recognize that it is a struggle for us all.
Yeah, I think that before podcasts were there, that's what it would have been, right? It would have been the phone call or the nudge at the grocery store when you see one of your training partners. And obviously, like when I talk to people that are gym owners or I talk to people that are world champions or whatnot, which has been a lot of the sampling of what I've had on so far. But I did a recording last night and it'll come out later in January. And it's somebody that has a more traditional background. And it's amazing because one of the cool things about jujitsu is that people pop in and out. We'll pop in and out of each other's lives at different, parts of the timeline. So somebody that comes into that Long Island gym that you go to and sees brown belt Jordan has no idea about the story of the blue belt blues or whatnot. They just see a guy that's probably mauling through folks, and they don't know, right?
And they don't believe you.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what everybody says. It's like, trust me, you just have to make it through this. You have to get out of this metaphorical shark tank. And the more I talk to people that have similar journeys to us, which, by the way, as much as I would have loved to have been a 25-year-old world champion and sort of wreck the adult league or whatnot, that just wasn't my story.
Yeah.
And it isn't for so many other people. So, it's just a part of the journey. And I'm glad there are platforms like this that can draw parallels. And for me, if it hits one person and it encourages one person to make it to that next step and kind of get from trough to trough, and it's a supplement to their training. I think it's worth it.
Absolutely. So let's
it.
take it back a little bit to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
Sure. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm a St. Louis guy, hardcore Cardinals fan, and the land of bricks and Budweiser. So St. Louis, Missouri kid here. I left when I was 17. I enlisted in the Marine Corps right out of high school.
Wow.
Just kind of a dumb knuckle dragger. I didn't have any prestige associated with it at all. Had gone on family vacations and whatnot, but I'd never seen the Pacific Ocean until I landed in Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego in February with my heavy coat and realized that there's palm trees and there's life outside of the winters and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my upbringing right there. I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I stayed in the Marine Corps for 5 years. And, that's a big part of my DNA right there. Got out in 2000 before all the wars started and whatnot.
Wow.
So while JP and I share the mats, I mean, we don't share those same experiences that he had. I wouldn't even feel comfortable being in the same sentence as he is in terms of some of the actions and the heroism that he showed and is documented in some of the books that you've talked about in your podcast and in your book. But that's kind of my upbringing. I got out. My wife and I were married in Okinawa, Japan. So my wife is a native Okinawan, which has always been kind of a fun, part of our life. We have 2 kids. I have a son right now who's 23. He's living down in Florida, and then I have a son that's wrapping up high school here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So
wow. You don't look old enough to have left the military before 9/11 and then have a 24-year-old.
Hey man, that's
Thanks,
jujitsu.
jujitsu.
Thanks, jujitsu. Exactly. And a little bit of maybe some protein shakes along the way.
That's
Same with
did you
you.
grow up playing sports in St. Louis?
Yeah, I was a baseball player, but I did a little bit of everything. When I got into high school, I kind of did the gamut of high school sports. Wrestled for a little bit, but not enough to consider myself anything other than probably a ball player. And what's ironic about it is both my kids never picked up a baseball glove or a baseball bat in their life.
Wow.
So yeah.
So after you went to St. Louis and then went to the West Coast, where did you land after you left the military?
So most of my time in the military was overseas. I mean, that was the reason I went in, is to be, kind of a deployed Marine. I mean, I had no desire to be stationed in Topeka, Kansas or anything like that. Like I wanted to get out and go see things and go do things. So I was stationed in the Far East, based out of Okinawa, but had an opportunity to go all over the place. And the last year that I spent in the military, I came to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And essentially there was a joint reserve base concept that was being sort of piloted right out of the Clinton years. And they unmothballed a base in Fort Worth, had a few Marines that were there, and I had an opportunity to go be a part of it, which was a great segue into a more traditional life in the civilian world. And being here in a major metroplex, lots of economic opportunity, lots of career options for somebody that was young and just trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I made it in and how I made it out, I suppose.
Well, the Marines are very well represented on the Business Jiu-Jitsu podcast. We've had
I've noticed.
yourself.
I don't deserve a place with any of those guys either, by the way, man. I was just a straight up,
Just
snow
any
shoveler.
amount of services. There's so many lessons to be learned from the active service, and having that instinct and learning and going through basic training. And at least the members that have of the Business Jiu-Jitsu podcast cohort of Marines have all found some measure of success, which is pretty cool. But yeah, recently we had Kyle Rogers on, and in the past we had JJ Winans and Nick Kumalatos and all a few others that have had some stints in the Marines. So thank you to all the Marines out there listening, and I do encourage you to get in touch, especially if you have business stories or questions. So, but thank you for your service. So you come out of the Marines and you come out of Okinawa. And at that point, you go right to college?
No, I was I mean, just from a timing perspective, I hit it right, I think, in terms of just career opportunities. And I was a mechanic in the Marine Corps. And so I went and got my FAA licenses, which is what's required to work on commercial aircraft. And I got hired at Delta Airlines as a mechanic. So I was just, turban grease scrubbing, midnight serving, working out on the line at midnight and in the freezing cold of, sideways rain and at the Dallas Fort Worth airport, which is how I got started. And then after September 11th, the airline industry, as you might remember, I mean, it just went through such a tumultuous ride. And so it really started rattling me up a little bit. And even though I really enjoyed the career field, I just realized I'm going to have a plan B and probably a plan C here. Just looking a couple chess moves ahead because it's going to get rough. And it ultimately did. So that encouraged me to go finish my undergraduate degree, which I did at Embry-Riddle, as you mentioned. It was more of a professional degree in aeronautical management. And then I went immediately and enrolled in grad school, got my MBA at night, and just sort of got a knack for finance. And from there, just sort of, kind of just knife fought my way up the ladder, found a niche in as an analyst somewhere. And then, just sought to outwork everybody I could find in my path, had a lot of people that brought me up, but that's kind of the connection between the financial background that you talked so much about in the strange reading of my bio to, that midnight shift, scrubbing turban grease out of your fingernails,
Wow.
Yeah, somewhat of a non-traditional path, I suppose, but it's been a pleasure for me, and I've enjoyed it.
Very interesting background coming out of the Marines and rising through finance and to the level of CFO. Kyle Rogers, who was recently on the podcast, as a COO, operationally driven. Even as an engineer, or how you said working on airplanes, you would think there's a lot of operational proficiency there, but to go the finance route, not to say that it doesn't happen. I'm sure there's plenty of Marines that have made their way into the finance community, but to rise to the level of CFO is quite impressive, and have done it at a few different organizations, especially publicly traded ones.
The funny thing about it is, I mean, traditionally people think of CFOs because, people think of them as former public accountants or folks that come out of Big Four accounting, like from Price Waterhouse or Ernst & Young or whatever the case may be. They'll have backgrounds in like financial reporting or SEC reporting or something that has been the more traditional path. But realistically, like the role itself over the last couple of decades, particularly after 2004, when like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act came out, it just reset the requirement. And the niche that I found in the financial world, of course, you have to understand the numbers. Of course, you have to be able to dig in and understand the technical aspects of the role, whether that's in accounting or tax or global structuring or more traditional financial planning and analysis. That's obviously, those are core attributes of it. But most importantly is the understanding of the economics of the business. And that comes from experience in the operation. It comes with an interest in the in the industry and the company itself. And so I think long gone are the days of those ivory towered CFOs that are just up there sort of counting through things, and they'll pop out every once in a while. Not that there's a lot that do that anymore. But what I have found is that just a willingness to get out there, exercise some humility, go and learn about the business, learn from the front line, and then bring that back to your team. Not only does that connect your team to the business, who might have that more traditional like staff accountant upbringing, where like those roles are typically very fungible. People that come into the airline business, for example, in accounting, they could also go into pharmaceuticals, they could go into tech, and so as a CFO and as a leader in the business, you need to find ways to connect those dots for folks. And I found that those skills have been more valuable than what might be considered more traditional, like the financial reporting and gap voodoo and all of that other stuff that tends to come with the CFO role.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we've gone down this path, and I'm glad that you're very conversational on it, because I think it's a good time to maybe stop and give people a little mentoring or tutoring on exactly where the CFO role has evolved. Let me set it up for you a little of what I've seen happen and then what's happened at some of my businesses. So, people often think, like you said, oh, the CFO is a graduate of the accounting department, and you come up through the traditional accounting roles into the controller, and then the controller grows up into the CFO. And that does still happen a lot.
Sure.
I
Can be
think
very
that
successful that way too.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of that is still very much accurate and across many businesses, except the thing is that as the tax code becomes more complex, and as the accounting role and the controller role keeps being built out more and more, filing for taxes is a very different discipline than the financing of a company. 100%. And reporting to all the different tax authorities, especially if you're a public company, and looking back and reporting to your investors that way is very, very different than the way that the other side of the business works when they're growing the business. And so you do see a lot of these CFO roles now working hand in hand with the CEO on growing the business and working on financing. And even from when I started my career, how simple it was to finance a building post 08. Like all you needed was a pulse.
Yeah.
And now if I want to do the most simple financing, the volumes of paperwork, 3 years of tax returns for every entity I'm involved with. I own probably over 35 businesses now. So they want to see 3 years of tax returns for every entity I own. They want to see personal financial statements. They want to see every single bank account. The cash balance is 3 months. And so you're talking about literally tens of thousands of pieces of paper to close a basic financing transaction. And so the more complicated they've made both of these disciplines, you've had to separate it out. So I'm interested from your perspective, coming up through that operationally minded role into the financial analyst role, where is the modern CFO, where do you see the position going?
Well, it's a good question. And oh gosh, in each one of the experiences that I've had, it's required a few different tools to be developed in my own tool belt. And because, for example, because I didn't have that traditional accounting upbringing, my first CFO role, it might have even been borderline irresponsible to have put me in it. I had good mentors that were there. I had good people that brought me up around it. I had traditionally come from more of a traditional FP&A background, financial planning and analysis. And the controllership world and the taxation world were something that I sort of had to kind of limp through a little bit. So number one, no matter what CFO, what industry, no matter how complex the organization, I think every CFO needs to recognize that they're not going to have every tool in their tool belt. And I mean, obviously that can be flexed, that can be throttled, and depending on the circumstances, it will depend on how much of a supplement you're going to need. But more than likely, you're going to need to build a team of experts around you. And in the company that I'm in right now, the majority of our operations are offshore. And most of my team, for example, is in Europe. We have very complicated funding structure that goes that goes through a lot of different entities and a lot of different jurisdictions. I'm not going to have developed that background, and it wouldn't have mattered if I had built my career up in public accounting and PwC through the traditional SEC reporting route or whatever. That's just not something that you're going to people focus on. There's subject matter experts there, and so I think for the modern CFO, no matter where you're at, that's probably the first thing that you need to take some stock on is what kind of tools do you need to put in your tool belt? Can you develop them, or do you need to have them developed around you? And then quickly start putting those supplements in place. And I've got a person that focuses exclusively on tax. I've got a person that came out of E&Y that is my controller and that I rely on. And it's up to me to make sure that I can speak the language and that I know the right thread to pull on and the right holes to poke at. But there's no way one person in the modern world, in a company that has any level of complexity and what you described with your interpersonal situation and that organizational structure that you've got, from an entity perspective, it's hard for one person to cover all that, right? And so that's probably the first thing. And then I imagine there's another layer of that as well, that when you get into the individuality of each different organization, it's going to have its own unique problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to put a little stamp on that puppy, there's people who are in the accounting field, and generally accounting is looking backwards, and financing is looking forwards, generally speaking, and
Yeah, generally
looking
speaking.
to grow the business. And so Dave has had experience in both of those theaters. In my own career, I keep going back and getting more and more education in accounting and in finance, and just
really?
keep sharpening the sword, keep learning more. And every time I go back and learn more about it, and I have more and more experience, it's like jiu-jitsu. I'm learning the same arm bar, I'm learning the same escape,
Yeah.
but I'm picking up new nuances on it and new details that have been so impactful in my life. And I just want to give a quick shout out right here to my professor at Harvard Business School online, which anybody can go and pick up his books, is Mihar Desai, Finance. And you could take his class. I think pretty sure you could do it for free. And he has a book called The Wisdom of Finance. And he
Wow.
talks about these principles, and he's got a couple great books on really, really easy to digest books on finance. So if you're interested in the finance role or in becoming a CFO one day, I absolutely, I'll put all the links in the comment section of this. But
No,
yeah.
that's super interesting. And if I remember correctly, I mean, just from reading This Is It, your book, I mean, if I remember correctly, you sort of walked through a scenario in there where you either had an entry level accountant or somebody that wasn't quite up to the task, and then you elevated that role over time. So I'm kind of curious how that's panned out. I mean, it's been a few years since the book's been written and your
Oh yeah.
business has grown. So has
So
that been consistent with your experience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had a lot of on the ground trial by fire experience with the financing and the accounting of a business. And in all transparency, the first time I took accounting in my freshman year of college, I had to drop it mid semester because I was going to fail. Now, I decided to take
I'm
an
with
8
you.
a.m. class in my first semester of college, and that was really the reason why I was going to fail. But the point is that when I
That's
first
good initiative, poor judgment.
when I first took accounting in college, all of these concepts were like Chinese.
Yeah.
I could not understand it.
Yeah,
When
they
I
could be
went back and took
irrational.
accounting after I already was running a business, all the learnings were filtered through my own business experience. And so these
Yeah.
concepts went from being concepts and widgets to being through my own business. And I
Yeah.
understand it so much more. So much more. So when I was,
They can be quite arbitrary otherwise.
yeah. So what Dave's talking about is I told the story in my first book when I was growing mixology from one to its first probably 5 or 6 stores, my clothing business. And I hired over a 3-year period, I had 12 bookkeepers. And I had 12 crazy stories from all of those bookkeepers. And I made a huge bet in 2015, starting a wholesale business on top of my retail business. So we just opened a wholesale division. Long story short, I lost $1 million in that business. It was devastating. I mean,
quite
I talk
severe.
about on this podcast. I don't sugarcoat the numbers for people. To some people, that sounds like no money. To other people, that's more money than they could ever conceive of. But
Yeah.
I was about 30 at that time, and I took this huge risk, and I failed spectacularly. And my bookkeeper at the time was completely ill-equipped to help me with the complexities of the size of the business. And we had a big loss on the business that year, probably somewhere to the tune of like $400,000 or $500,000 total loss when you take all the divisions together. I knew I had to go out and get a controller, someone who could really help me with all the financial controls of the building, managing my payroll, managing my inventory properly. And so I had all this revenue, but the money was just leaking out of the bottom of the business. And it wasn't that we weren't doing well. It was that we were just, for example, this bookkeeper wrote a $26,000 check twice and just gave $26,000 away. I remember, and we caught it, but you can only imagine how many things I didn't catch because of poor controls.
Yeah. Statistically, if that's just randomly stumbled upon, I mean, yeah,
Right.
I'm sure there were a few other leaky
And
holes.
so an early part of my philosophy in business came, I said, I don't have the budget right now to go out and hire someone who is going to be paid probably 3 or 4 times what that bookkeeper was going to get paid. It was going to be my biggest hire of all time. But what I said to myself was, if I hire the right person, they're going to save me many multiples of their salary. And so I worked with a recruiting firm, and I went out and I hired a really great controller. He's still my right-hand man to this day. He's actually now
got a
the
cameo
CFO
in the book as well. I think he had a
He's
couple
now the
pages.
CFO of our business. He grew up from controller
Wow.
to CFO, and he's an amazing guy, an amazing CFO.
That is awesome.
But in his first year of business, using fundamental financial controls, he saved our business over $1 million. And so we had a massive swing from about a $400,000 or $500,000 loss to a huge gain the next year. And the revenue didn't change all that much. It was just about planning the controllable expenses. And so, that's that story of my own experience, my early experiences with growing a business. And my dad always told me, he said, sales drive the business. Focus on the sales. Focus on the sales. But it does get to a point where you really need to be very, very disciplined with your spending, because you can make 10 million bucks, but if you spend 10 million in one, that's it.
Yeah.
So
I've heard that story so many different times from different people as well. And I have a really good friend. He's a very successful entrepreneur and has put a humongous platform together that I won't go too deep into. But he started as just kind of a closet trader, and he was a buy low, sell high type business. It wasn't anything sexy. It was just something that needed to, kind of get an account going. And he had an accountant, and he used QuickBooks. And so, he said the accountant was just super focused on getting QuickBooks. And he said, the story he'll tell, and paraphrased and shortened, is that like, I had it open for a while, and then I just closed my laptop and said, if this is all I focus on right here, then I'm never going to go anywhere. I won't generate $1 to put in this thing, And so that's the lesson for CFOs as well, is that, like, I don't work at an accounting company, like we have a commercial premise, and it's important for the CFO to understand that, find a way to support that, and then also build the team up underneath it. Like, if your staff accountant doesn't understand that as well, we're not there to produce financials. That's a byproduct. That's a consequence, And so sometimes that's a tough culture to mix in. And I've always I've never been a CEO. I'm not a founder. I'm not a successful entrepreneur like you are. And so, I've always looked up longingly and sort of, that's the next skill to build on,
Is that something that, do you have a burning desire for the next chapter of your life?
It's a part of it for sure. And my wife and I have done a few different things. We've got a small little holding company where we've done a couple different enterprises, but they've never taken off, and a lot of that has been a bit of the fear factor, and a bit of the safety net as well. Like, it's easy to play it safe and be inside your comfort zone. So stand by in the future. That might be there.
Listen, I just read this great book. I finished it a day or two ago, and I put it up on Instagram. And
what's it called?
It's the Checklist Manifesto. You may have read it because it's.
I haven't. Is it in your book, listed as one of the recommended?
No, I just got it recommended to me recently, even though it's a couple of years old. But the reason why it might be interesting for you, especially, is because it was a doctor who took the principles of airline pilots and their checklists over to the medical theater, and about how simple checklists help us avoid mistakes. he has this great quote about entrepreneurs. He's talking about VCs finding great entrepreneurs to invest in. And he says, finding a good idea is apparently not all that hard. Finding an entrepreneur who can execute a good idea is a different matter entirely. One needs a person who can take an idea from proposal to reality, work the long hours, build a team, handle the pressures and setbacks, manage technical and people problems alike, and stick with the effort for years on end without getting distracted or going insane. Such people are rare and extremely hard to spot. And like when I read that about entrepreneurs, what I think of is jujitsu black belts. It's like, is it a
Yeah.
different description of being able to just stick it out and grind? And you think about how many people begin the journey and
Yeah.
how few make it to the end. Or when I say, or just keep continuing, I should say, not even the end, but just continue down the
Yeah.
path.
Just hang in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. So
So
true.
where'd you start your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu journey?
Down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at under Pablo Popovich
Mhm.
at the BJJ Center, I think is what it was
Nice.
called. Yeah, it was,
ADCC legend.
yeah, big time. And he was on the mats. Wagner Rocha was there as
Mhm.
well. He had originally started sort of a branch of the BJJ Center. So there were some just really big names back then. And of course, I was too dumb and naive to even realize what I had available to me. It just happened to be the closest to my house. And that was in 2007. And so do the math. I mean, that's almost 15 years,
Yeah.
and you know where I'm at now. So, I mean, there've been a lot of pauses that have happened along the way. And,
Yeah.
that's just part of the journey.
It is. I started in 2009, and it's a long road,
It
especially when
is.
you're, not a young man and you can dedicate your whole life to it and live on the mat and
I
you have
know.
career and family and all the obligations. Today, I had a full day of meetings and calls, and at 10 a.m. I got a call from my son's school. Oh, he's sick. You have to come pick him up. My wife is a doctor. She couldn't do it, and the nanny wasn't available today, and that was it. I had to drop
Yeah.
everything I was doing in my life to go take care of my 4-year-old.
There you go. And that's the thing. There's seasons to this too, And so I've had this conversation several times, and it's come up on the podcasts that we've done. In that, originally when I started the podcast, I mean, it was about kind of like achieving some balance with jujitsu as in a more prominent role because I felt like people had left it out. But sometimes it's the other way around. I mean, there's definitely a reciprocal to that. And the fulcrum always stays the same. It's just how you load it up. Sometimes people hyper focus on jujitsu and they end up burning themselves out. And then they also end up neglecting a career. They might neglect their family as well, which isn't a good recipe to longevity.
Mm,
And as much as I would have loved, as I mentioned before, to have been that, 20-year-old stud that just, kind of, rocked the world and made a name in the competition scene, had I been that, I wouldn't be talking to you about business today. I wouldn't have all of the pleasures that come with being a husband and a father and having a family that I love. And
yeah.
so, your cups are filled up different ways. And like, I think the conversations that we have about jujitsu and the stages of life that we're in right now, to me, I just want to keep that flame going. And there've been so many instances where it's almost just blown out and slipped out of my hands. And I've had people along the way that have brought me back up, that have pulled me back up. Some of it on pure luck, some of it on pure timing. And I hope people hear those messages. And if you're 35 years old, if you've had your purple belt dusty in the closet for a while and you're afraid to get back into it, guess what? There are people that have felt that way as well, and
Mhm.
your blue belt blues, for example, like, why am I no good? Why can't I figure this out?
Yeah.
Believe the brown belt when he tells you, like after he's done, sort of turning you upside down and folding you in your laundry, hey, we all kind of go through that. So,
Yeah.
I'm just fortunate at this stage of life. I've got a little bit more time to devote to it. I've been able to travel quite a bit and train. I've
Mhm.
been up to your neck of the woods a few times and trained up in Maine with the Origin crew, and
Oh,
and
nice. Yeah.
it's just
Shout
the
out
last
Pete Roberts,
big time.
friend of the podcast. And
100%. I watched his episode on a business jiu-jitsu podcast, and Pete, whether he knows it or not, and whether he'll watch this or watch mine or not, was actually a big part of the inspiration for the BJJ Executive podcast.
oh, yeah.
And what ultimately ended up happening, Jordan, was that I had wanted to kind of create some sort of platform for a long time, but maybe it was the business wiring. I don't know ultimately what kept dragging me down into this sort of commercial hole. And either I heard Pete say this or Pete might have mentioned it. I mean, Pete's been in a lot of different podcasts. And so sometimes you hear hours of somebody, even though you might not know them that well personally. But he mentioned part of the underlying premise for Origin in the first place was that he wanted to give something back to Jiu-Jitsu. He's talked so much about the Deco and Alexi and how much they mean to him as a part of the, part of his journey. And it just sort of clicked, like there's a communal aspect to this. That doesn't have to be something that's got anything other than the ability to give back. And that's 100% what I want to be able to do, is just be a source of optimism and encouragement for folks that are out there that have gone through some of the struggles that I know I've been through and continue to go through, and maybe haven't even graduated from the infancy of yet. I don't really know. But the more I talk about it, the more I realize that, man, we're all kind of in this little pot of boiling water, and it's just and sometimes it's just a matter of hanging on, let it cool off a little bit. So,
yeah. Well, what I found is that when you make good decisions and you do good things in your life, more good things seem to come, and one of those good things is what you were just describing, which is, passing it on.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to go down the path of the journey, but my sensei always says, each one teach one. And, you're the act of teaching and the act of sharing makes you better anyway. Like it just helps you get better. And it is just impossible to get better at jiu-jitsu without great training partners and great teachers and mentors. And
for sure,
that common thread that you and I have found is that other people kind of want to talk about it too. It's like, oh, wait, I've had that experience also. And like yourself, I've had the opportunity to train all over the world. This year alone, I trained in Germany. I trained in Berlin. I was in Paris.
Oh, wow.
Been in Texas and Florida. Literally all over the world training jiu-jitsu at different places. I was just in St. Bart's with the BJJ Globetrotters guys.
No kidding. That's amazing.
Wherever I go, and I'm talking about now, I've been training. This is my 14th year I'm in training. I have, knock on wood, I have never once had a bad experience going into a gym. Yeah. It has always been the same thing. And I think that's a testament to jiu-jitsu, like you're saying, paying it back to jiu-jitsu. I think that the art itself, there's something about it that when you're on that mat and you're training, you're so present and you're so locked in on what you're doing. Even guys, even if you're an asshole, while you're doing jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu's got you, I think. That's always. True. I'm sure there's guys out there, there's the knuckleheads. I mean, I've seen them coming out of the gym, but they don't usually last very long.
That's right. They usually have a way of getting flushed out. The other thing that I found, and I'm not sure if this was your experience in like Germany and France, for example, but like I lived in Japan for a bit. A couple of years ago, I went over there to study Japanese and take a little bit of a career break. And of course, I found a place to train immediately, because not only was it, important to me to just kind of keep the path going, but it's a great way to make friends and stay in shape and all of that other stuff. And the instruction was in Japanese for the most part. And what's funny is that after a while, I didn't even notice. Like it didn't matter, like we're all doing this. Nobody cared. I mean, like it was just, you have your lives in and outside of the gym, but I mean, like that is such a unique bond. And while you're rolling, I mean, you have that empty mindset that's just, I'm present in the problem that I've got in front of me, which is fill in the blank. It could be a hand in the collar. It could be something on top. Yeah. I mean, there's just, there's innumerable answers to that issue, but that's what's beautiful about it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, the friendships are special, and I keep in touch with a lot of people all over the world that I've trained with a few times. They follow the podcast, they follow the social media, and for all the terrible things that social media has brought into our life and our people, it has its good things too. And that's one of the beautiful things, is being able to stay in touch with people of all different cultures from all over the world. Yes, when I was in Paris, just like you, it was in French.
Really?
All the people there.
Presumably you can't speak French. I don't know.
No, maybe. The lesson was in French. Most of them did not speak any English whatsoever. There was one American expat a female that I was training with a little bit, but I mean, I probably rolled with 10, 15 guys that night, and there was very little English.
Yeah.
In Berlin, there was almost no German. It was
really?
like completely in English. Berlin is a very international city, and English is one of the very, very common languages there, if not one of the most common languages. And so Interesting
Yeah,
dichotomies there. But yeah,
it
going
really
all over the
is.
world and creating these friendships is a very powerful part of the art too. And I love being able to drop into a city. So I was in Berlin. My wife was running the Berlin Marathon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We
Good for her.
landed, went into the hotel room. I was not in that room for more than 30 seconds. And I was like, I'm running to this class. I got to go.
Yeah,
Walked downstairs, called an Uber. 15 minutes later, I'm doing jujitsu.
that's
Like,
awesome.
how
What better
awesome
way
is
to,
that?
that's amazing. I mean, what better way to get the jet lag out and all the airplane funk and all that other
Oh, yeah.
stuff than, sweat out some of that nasty airplane food, on the mats. I have
Yeah.
found that like when I go, for example, like I mentioned, I have a big component of my team that's in Ireland. I don't know if I actually
Mhm.
mentioned that or not, but I have a home gym in Dublin that I
Yeah.
go to because I'm just there so often. And when I first arrived, man, you want to talk about guys just going out of their way to make you feel welcomed. And I remember having a conversation with the professor, the person that owns that school, and shout out to Jungle BJJ in Dublin, on just like, hey, you know what? A lot of my early upbringing was traveling, and I didn't always have the best experience, but when I did, I remembered it, and that's the experience that I want to have here. And guess what? When I come back to Highland Village, Texas, and train at Double Five with Formiga, I mean, he brings that spirit to the mat. And when I see visitors come in, I mean, I want to emulate that as well. And
Yeah.
and so, I mean, there's so much of a pay it forward and also a give it back. And it's not exclusive to jujitsu, but it is somewhat unique, and
Yeah.
it's persistent for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about your academy and your professor and just maybe the scene, jujitsu scene in Austin right now and what's going
Yeah,
on?
I'm actually in Dallas, Fort Worth.
Oh,
I
you're in
had a
Dallas.
house in Austin. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we've been a Dallas family for a long time. We've sort of been in between cities in a few different instances, but we are DFW residents, and I train at the Double Five Highland Village location, which is under Raphael Formiga. He's a fifth degree black belt under Andre Dedeco, which I think you've got some kind of a connection with, or have been
Yeah.
to some of the Dedeco seminars.
Yeah.
Um,
JP, that's where I met JP. He did
okay.
a echelon front leadership training at the Deco's Academy.
Oh, I
And me
see.
and one of
Okay.
my buddies from Jiu-Jitsu, a guest on this, Michael Conacelli, who's a FDNY, we drove up. We left at 3 o'clock in the morning. We drove to Massachusetts. We did like a 8.5 hour day at the Decos, and then we drove back to New York. It was a very,
Man,
very long day.
that's
But
amazing.
yeah, shout
That's
out to
amazing.
Deco. What a guy. I mean, he
100%.
puts his arm around you, makes you feel
Dude,
like, you're the only guy in the world. I mean, it's
100%. Like in a way, and I've talked to Formiga about this on several different occasions. Formiga and Dedeco have a relationship that has inspired me in ways that I never would have thought with jujitsu. And one of the most, I guess, unexpected ways was when I realized, first of all, the lineage itself is something that I've paid attention to. And so because I had heard stories about the Deco, when I went up to Maine to train at the Origin camps, the Deco was a big part of that. Formiga went last year, but the year before he hadn't been, and I was there by myself, and I saw Dedeco sitting over talking to a student. I went over to introduce myself, and I just told him, "Hey, look, I'm one of Formiga's students, and I just wanted to say hi and thank you for all the knowledge that you've passed on and what you're doing here." Man, his face just lit up because of the relationship that he's got with Formiga. He grabbed me, he walked me through old photos in his phone and stuff when Formiga was a kid. It,
yeah,
and while that's fun and stuff like that, what it did was it kind of jarred into me this notion that you get locked into your program, you get stuck in your like, hey, I'm going to go to the Tuesday night class, or I'm going to go train at lunch on Wednesday, or whatever the case may be. And it's tempting and sometimes inevitable for that to be somewhat individual. But when you realize that this has a connection that is more community based than you might realize, and it's so much more about others than it is about you, and this has got a bigger impact than the individual could possibly have, then it becomes such an enriching experience. And that's what
yeah,
happened to me as a result of the relationship that Formiga and Dedeco have. It has nothing to do with me. I'm just Formiga's student, you know. But it really jarred something into me, and as I talked to Formiga about it, I mean, at some point, like I would love to be able to teach jujitsu, and I hope I can emulate that as well and
yeah,
transmute that to my students, just like it's been to me. It's been one of the most unexpected and rewarding parts of jujitsu that I've had so far. All the moves, all the fun fitness stuff, all that stuff aside, I mean, the more
yeah.
spiritual and emotional elements have been the most enriching and the most unexpected.
Yeah, there's this like release that you get, like a mental release when you're done like the amount of problem solving that you have to do, you know, they
Yeah,
call human chess. Like you
100%.
walk out of there and you're just, whew, it's
100%. I'm sure you've experienced this as well. I mean, given the amount of responsibility that you've got as a CEO and as a founder, and having the complexity in the life that you've described, I've walked into the mats with like major problems with huge economic implications that I just couldn't see the back end of. I'm like, oh, here I am. I'm going to train. 1.5 hours later, I mean, I am clear-minded, and of course, the problem isn't solved, but the solution at least had a path, and I was able to untangle and I suppose detach enough in order to, see straight and clear, in order to kind of find the other side. It doesn't make the problem simpler, but it makes the solution a little bit more visible, and that is jujitsu.
that's I talk about that
I don't
very
get that from
often.
running.
No, well, they've talked about this a lot. Running is so mental, and you get in your head even more. In jujitsu, you are completely out of your head. There is no
Disconnected.
thought. You are so 100% locked in on what you are doing. You can't slip up for a second. If you slip up, you are all of a sudden your arms over your head and your legs behind
Totally.
your back, and you're
That's
getting
it. You're
twisted and
folded
turned.
up, you know.
Woof. I mean, you cannot. So you're so locked in on what you're doing. But what happens is your subconscious is working, and the principles that are playing out and the techniques that are playing out are helping you unlock the problems of your life, your home problems, your life problems, your family problems, your
Yeah,
work
very much.
problems, and then I have the benefit that my sensei is a deep thinker and a very, very wise tactician, and he's very well read in all of the martial arts. And so most nights he does a mat chat after class, and he talks about Musashi, and he talks about Kano,
Oh,
and he
wow.
talks about Buddhist philosophy. He talks about the real philosophy of martial arts. And even though he would say that he doesn't know anything about business, like he has helped me through so many business problems. When I've, some of the deepest problems that I've faced in my career have been the things you don't want to do: lawsuits, having to
Mm,
fire people, dealing with competitors. And so, like, you're dealing with these issues, and you really don't hear people talk about these issues much. I mean, nobody gives you a
yeah,
playbook on how to deal with employment labor terms, ADA lawsuits,
yeah.
these,
Becomes very binary, very black and
yeah.
white.
And so you have to think about, like, what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing to do. And very often your first instinct is, just like in jujitsu, it's usually counterintuitive to your first instinct. Like, that's what
Mm,
jujitsu teaches you. You unlearn the things that you just would otherwise do, right?
yeah,
And so when somebody's on top of you, your first instinct is to push them off with all your force and all your arms and everything, even though what you really need to do is you need to make a frame, and you need to get onto a hip, and you need to do a knee to elbow escape, right?
yeah. You have
And
to endure the
so,
pain a little longer, which is
yeah,
counterintuitive, as you said. That's why you want to get them off you. This guy shouldn't be here.
yeah. And
But
so
the answer is a little bit deeper path into the cave, into the pain cave.
I hope that any of the listeners here, if you decide to start a business or you're running a business, I don't wish it on anybody, but if you run a business and you have some measure of success, then one day you're going to get served a lawsuit on your paper and on your desk. And unfortunately, I've been there many dozens of times,
Wow.
And when you open up that lawsuit, the first thing that you want to do is metaphorically push it off with all your might. F you. Why is this happening to me? Calling your lawyer, calling this, calling your friend, calling your wife. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And when Freddie Trillo is on this podcast, Freddie Trillo is a former SWAT officer and BJJ black belt down in Miami. He said that when he started jiu-jitsu, it was because he was a rookie cop, and this guy threw him to the ground and was beating the life out of him. And as he was dying, he's thinking to himself, how is this happening to me?
Wow.
And like,
I'll have to check that one out. I did
yeah,
see that one, but
that's
wow.
a good one. And Freddie Trillo is a great dude. And so you see these parallels, whether you're a SWAT officer or an executive or an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, or you're running a jiu-jitsu academy, and these things happen to you. A student slips and falls, or somebody drives their truck through the window of your academy. Like, all these business things happen. Your controller loses $26,000, and your
Or yeah,
first
twice.
instinct is almost always to metaphorically push them off with all of your might. But
That's
what
an
you really
interesting
need to do is
parallel.
build that muscle for the knee to elbow escape in business. And those are tactics. You learn this tactical approach to business, that there are things that you do. There's a series of steps. And actually, that's what my new book is about, Business Jiu-Jitsu. It's about all the things I learned through jiu-jitsu and my business career. And then when COVID hit, how did I just know what to do? Why did it become an opportunity for me? How did I grow my business through COVID? When other 600,000 businesses folded in 2020,
especially brick and mortar.
Yeah, brick and mortar, right? It's like the 3 million businesses have gone out in the U.S. since COVID, 600,000 right after COVID, like immediately. And so, like, how did I know what to do? Like, so that's what my new book is about. It's like
I can't
going
wait to
back
get
and
into
dissecting
it, man.
each one of those decisions and saying, like, how did I know to do the if somebody throws me to the ground right now in jiu-jitsu, I just do it.
Yeah, no
I don't
kidding.
think about it.
One of the things that I've started focusing on a lot more, and this is sort of a reverse path into business, I suppose. And there's a reciprocal to this. It could work both ways, but you've obviously, or presumably anyway, have hired a lot of people in your businesses over the years. You outlined some of it in your book. One of the takeaways that I had in your book actually was like, disloyalty is a disease, I think it was, so that's a whole different topic. But one of the things that I have focused on as a somewhat older practitioner, I'm 44 years old. I mean, there's a lot of people that are rolling that are a lot older than I am, that I hope to be able to make too. But like at some point you need to shift your game and you need to focus on the long haul. And to me, it's about intent. And so when I go in and I train, I have a game plan. When I warm up, I have a game plan. That doesn't mean I don't have fun. That doesn't mean that some nights I don't, talk or whatnot. But like if I'm rolling with somebody, I have a productive goal that I want to get out of that role. And what I hope that accomplishes is that over time, the year that I spend doing that will be more productive than the year when I was a white belt or a blue belt and, kind of milled around or just showed up or whatnot. And the funny thing is when I connect that back to business, I started noticing in like hiring that people, let's say that you want to hire a GM or whatnot. And they say, hey, look, I've got 10 years of experience. Sometimes when I look into those, I'm like, you don't really have 10 years of experience. You kind of have like 2 years of experience 5 times, And when I start thinking about that, I'm like, that's not what I want my jiu-jitsu to be. That's not what I want my team to be built around either, So there is this parallel here that sometimes, once again, I mean, maybe it's just because we're jujitsu nerds and we live in this world and we try to find little strings to pull on and to get back to it. But like it's just one of those like little twists in the fabric that I didn't expect to find.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like the book I mentioned before, the Checklist Manifesto, which is
I'll have to check that out. I'm an avid
you'll
reader,
love it. I
so
mean, this is just
I would.
Absolute must read because it kind of goes back to one of my favorite quotes, which is from one of my favorite books, The Alchemist. And it says, it's so simple, it could be written on the face of an emerald. And there it is. These things in life are these truths. They're so simple. We overcomplicate everything. And so what these pilots have said is like, they have these little mini 1-page checklists for catastrophic problems. Surgeons, it's life and death when something goes wrong, they're starting a surgery. These very, very, very simple checklists have, I think that the original study that they did, it was published in 2007. It said that they had a 47% increase in deaths from like people dying. That's a huge improvement, and it was a global study. So,
wow.
You can imagine that beginning your day, your business, or your jiu-jitsu practice with the same basic principle of having, intention. I have my notebook sitting right in front of me, and every single day I start off the same thing. I have, and this is forever, but I have my checklist. I try to share this all the time, and it's like, how could I possibly stay on top of everything that I have to do? I couldn't remember all of it.
Yeah.
And so it's not the details of what to do. It's just the little reminders. And in jiu-jitsu, it's that's helped me tremendously to go in with, a game plan, something that I'm working on.
Yeah, that was one of the first lessons that I had with Formiga. We did a private when I first joined the gym, when I moved to the area, and some of it was kind of a get to know you type of a thing. And I came in as a purple belt. And so, but but it was basically like, look, we need to spend a little bit of time together figuring out what your game plan actually is. Doesn't have to be that way in a year. Doesn't even have to be that way on Friday, actually, but like we need to start somewhere. And then from there, we'll build technique. And if those techniques don't work, well, now we have something we can troubleshoot. But we're not just going to go about this and do it. I'm not going to watch you and tell you what I think or teach you a move or whatnot. It starts with coming up with a plan, and then you can execute on it. And of course, we can calibrate, we can make adjustments. But I would use the word game changer somewhat lightly, but it's kind of a game changer.
Yeah. Well, let me share my screen here for a moment.
Sure.
Love to show everybody your where to find you. So you're at BJJ Executive on Instagram.
That's right.
And you also, let's see.
Yeah, we've got a couple good ones out there. I've got a website as well, BJJ.
Yeah, I'm going to share that right now.
Yeah. And the purpose of the website really was to have a landing page for folks. I felt somewhat compromised just going out and asking somebody, hey, if you want to come on my podcast, please do so. I put a little bit of a trailer out there. And so if I were to ask you, for example, hey, do you want to come on and talk? Here's a little primer of what I like to talk about. That's why I put the website together. But if you don't have access to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatnot for whatever reason, or you're listening at your workplace and you'd rather do it on your computer, then you could also use the web player that's on the website. So
beautiful. Well, I have a feeling it's not going to be the last time we're talking on the podcast.
I hope not. And I hope I can reciprocate at some point, because again, so everybody knows, I reached out to you. I said, hey, look, is there a way that we can collaborate at some point? You've already kind of got a foothold in this. You've already got it figured out. You've been incredibly successful in business. I've seen some of the heavy hitters you've got on your podcast. If there's any way I could participate in it. And like 10 minutes later, man, you were back at me with a incredibly optimistic and encouraging message. And the pleasure has been all mine. I owe you, and I'm very appreciative of the time that you've invested in this and for allowing me to come on and be a part of this. So thank you very much, Jordan.
I thank you for the kind words, and I think that you're right, meant to be where you are. And I remember the day that I started my podcast, I had no connections. I had no track record. I had no Instagram account. I didn't have anything. All I had was the desire to go out there and speak to people that I admired. And I said to my wife, and this was December of 2019, I said, I'm going to write a book called Business Jiu-Jitsu. And and she's like, that's great. And I said, I'm going to start a podcast and talk to all my heroes. I said, I'm going to make my heroes my friends. She's like, well, that sounds like a great idea, honey. Go do that.
That's cool.
And January 2020, I locked myself in a podcast studio in New York City. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know any of the equipment. I had nothing. I just talked into the microphone, and then, 0 to 1. I read the quote before about entrepreneurs, 0 to 1. That's it.
There you go. Start with the first sale.
Yeah. Dave,
I'm
at your service. Let me know how I can be helpful to you, and I look forward to continuing our relationship. Thank you for being on today.
That sounds great. Thank you very much, Jordan.
Bye.
Bye.